Good afternoon, everyone. Has everyone had their coffee? Ready for the afternoon? All right, I see a few coffees out there, great. If you could grab your seats. Thank you. Lots of lively conversation, that's great. I hope you had good conversations over the lunch break. Really excited about bringing up our next presenters. Dr. Lobsang Tenzin Negi is the director of the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics and a professor of practice in Emory University's Department of Religion. He serves as co-director of the Emory Tibet Science Initiative. He developed the compassion meditation program Cognitively Based Compassion Training, CBCT, which he'll discuss today. Timothy Harrison is Associate Director for Cognitively Based Compassion Training at the Emory University Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics. He guides and supports CBCT teachers as they teach and adapt the meditation protocol for a variety of populations. Nice warm welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I hope you had a wonderful rest. It's a little cold here today, so I hope you're keeping yourself warm. I am from Emory University and with the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics, a center which is really established just last year, end of last year. But its mission or vision is to have a compassionate and ethical world for all, and we wish to promote human flourishing by developing educational programs, facilitate dialogues, and engage in research. So, Center has various programs. CBCT is now as part of this Center, but one of our main programs at the Center is a new educational programs, social, emotional, and ethical learning. And this is intended to be a program for K through 12, but also in higher education. Emory Tibet Science Initiative, it's a program that develops curriculum in sciences for Tibetan monks and nuns, and it's being offered in various monasteries and nunneries in India now. Certainly, Center also is involved in creating programs for higher education. At the moment, we are working towards developing a minor in compassion science at Emory University, and then also supporting ongoing research with in contemplative field. And I'd like to say a little bit about how the cognitively-based compassion training was developed, what the inspirations behind this, just a little bit of a history. Back in 2003, when I was teaching a course at Emory, in Tibetan Buddhism actually, but it was with a subtitle called Psychology of Enlightenment. You know, it reviewed some of the meditation models like compassion and mindfulness and so forth. And one of the students taking this course was Molly Harrington, one of the really brightest of the students. Actually, she was chosen to be the class orator at the commencement when she graduated. But she was very much involved in raising mental health at the campus because there were several suicides in 2003, around 2003, and the campus was really struggling with that. And she was involved in an initiative raising awareness, and she was one of the students in this class. And at some point, she said that we need to have some of these, brought to the community. I wasn't quite sure how that would work, but she kept kind of coming back. And then what happened was that at the time at Emory, one of my dear friends and a colleague, Dr. Charles Rezan, who is a psychiatrist and a researcher whose interests focus on mental health, like depression and anxiety and so forth. So he was very interested in studying some form of contemplative practice, meditation, and finding a colleague who was interested in doing this. So I teamed with him, and I developed this CBCT working with him. But I needed to have a background to understand what are some of the key kind of factors contributing to this mental health issues like depression and so forth. So what I learned, when we were discussing, what became clear was that many of today's problems, whether with depression or other problems, very much have to do with chronic stress. Chronic stress is correlated with many of our modern day maladies. When you think about the stress, chronic stress, today may be very much psychological, psychosocial, instead of actual kind of dangers that we encounter. And psychosocial stresses are often, the stresses are often emerging from our kind of tendency to overrate or exaggerate, project the ugliness or the danger out in the world, whether it has to do with the people or the situation. And when you have that, when we exaggerate or have these false projections, then our stress kind of reactions are also heightened. And they express themselves through hormonal ways or through the neural pathways leading to inflammation and other chemicals like cortisols and so forth. And when you have kind of excessive levels of or elevated levels of these hormones and their inflammations, it has cost on your body and mind that manifests in kind of diseases that we struggle today, heart disease, diabetes, dementia, cancer, but also those of the emotional kind, anxiety, depression, the burnout, and I think that we can say the kind of extreme sense of loneliness and so forth. When you have one kind of disease, this may have more of the kind of organic or the physical illnesses. It may contribute to the emotional ones, but on the other hand, emotional, if we are struggling with depression, that can also lead to the more organic kind of illnesses. So for us, understanding this kind of nature of what may be contributing to our illnesses, or at least, if not causes, kind of, making it harder to deal with, we needed an intervention, and at the time, there were, of course, mindfulness-based stress reduction program was highly, studied and strong. TM, or relaxation response, there were two major strong. In fact, I remember one of the researchers presenting, where the compassion was in relation to other programs. They had these two major highways, one mindfulness and the other TM, and that compassion was a tiny kind of the street, just that was back in 2005-06. But the protocol was developed in 2004, so we launched the program in 2005. But our hypothesis was that compassion by nature builds these relations, connections, and presents others in a kind of more kind and caring, softer, unthreatening light. That when we feel compassion towards each other, but also compassion, part of the compassion may involve also seeing the world more realistically. So that means that if this hypothesis is right, it will kind of reduce these over projections instead of seeing the world through this projections more realistically, that would reduce our kind of stress reactions. It will have, it in turn result in the less of the cost on your body and mind, and therefore might be preventive for some of these illnesses, at least kind of slow them down. So, like Geshe Jimbala, I the brilliant presentation that Geshe did last night. I come from the Buddhist tradition. I was a monk also, a former monk, and the same training we went through. I'm from Deepen Monastery, and Geshe was from Ganden Shatse Monastery. But this protocol is drawn from a tradition called lojong. It's the Indo-Tibetan Buddhist tradition that focuses on training the mind through systematic, introduction of certain strategies and ways to bring inner change. And it is, of course, secularized so that can be offered widely. I also drew from His Holiness's writing, Ethics for the New Millennium. Geshe Jimbala mentioned last night, was already out, an incredible resource. And of course, the material that I mentioned that is rooted in the lojong tradition. CBCT initially actually had 8 modules, and in time, the last 2 modules were kind of put into the 6th one. The last three modules were really about 3 degrees of compassion when it is expressed, so the wishing, aspiring, and engage or the active compassion. But we began with those 8 modules, and I will say a little bit about the foundational one first, but maybe first. So just to briefly, attention stability, it's primarily kind of done with the mindfulness of the sensation of the breath. Second module has to do with more like the present moment awareness, that the non-judgmental awareness of the present experiences. Self-compassion, self-acceptance has to do with seeing our ups and downs from broader perspective. So there is a shift in your kind of perspective, but that leading to the emotional shift as well. Inclusiveness or the impartiality. The inclusiveness is a kind of term we have been using recently. A friend of mine suggested that why don't we use inclusiveness instead of impartiality, and I'll come back to that. But that is where we focus on more of kind of common humanity part, and then the gratitude and affection for others through interdependence, through attuning to our interdependent nature, where we depend on others' kindness in many ways for every comfort and accomplishments that we have. And that the last one, it has to do with empathic concern, and that is, as compassion is about attuning to the vulnerability of the others. It arises from witnessing the vulnerabilities and the challenges, difficulties of others. So it has to do with how do we, what is our awareness about the challenges and the vulnerabilities that others experience. What I like to do is say a little bit about the foundational practice. That was not part of the protocol in the beginning, but when we started offering this, some of the populations, particularly when we started offering this to at-risk population, like the foster care children, and not only that, people struggling with the population that had struggled with like the suicide ideations and like that. That population particularly had quite difficulty jumping right into the mindfulness of breathing. It was really difficult. So what became clear, even though in the beginning our way of kind of leading or assisting the participants into this motivational part for the compassion was through sharing the benefits of compassion, like that. But that was more like sharing, maybe bring some scientific evidence or the studies, but also talk about from personal experiences like that, but not as a practice kind of in itself. And it became clear that we needed to first create an environment of that safety where people felt safe. If they were too agitated, too kind of aroused or agitated, it was really difficult to settle into this mindfulness of breathing. And that's where we developed this, the foundational part, that is the resting in a kind of moment of nurturance or kind moment. And this is done, and I hope to do a brief kind of the practice in a minute. But what I like to draw your attention to is this integrative model. What are the kind of skills and outcomes and how they are approached, how we envision that these modules can lead to some of the skills we are talking about. So this is the outcome, sort of the ultimate outcome would be well-being, but the model kind of sees that resilience and compassion, not that these are two unrelated, but as Arrow points out, they are related, but these two are the major constructs. That if one is resilient, and it also compassion in the sense that one is able to connect with others, well-being would result, the greater well-being will result from there. So this is a kind of the general, you can see the 6 modules there, and then the foundational practice as the kind of the foundational part. This part, this about nurturing moment or the kind moment, it's where we lead the participant into kind of not just knowing in head what the kindness means, but rather tasting it, feeling it. Like the beautiful practice Ali this morning led, that was the practice about connecting with it when we receive kindness. And what we found was that also it's not just receiving, actually giving kindness. It's like we found that sometimes people said that I couldn't think of a kind moment receiving, but I remember how I felt about holding my baby, my child, and giving like this also, or like for a good friend when he or she was struggling, that how my being there, and that was the kind moment. So it's a receiving and giving, but the main part here has to do with, like, it's a security priming. When we find ourselves in that comforting, caring environment, it does brings a sense of security. So this has to do with those people who may not feel very safe, actually, to begin with, first kind of creating that environment where one, not just external environment, it's the inner environment where one can bring that sense of security and calm. But it also is, since compassion, it has to do with the compassion. So it also, would that also motivate us to expand in something that feels good? We are kind of designed by our biology to seek internally. It becomes an internal kind of incentive. So being one who received or who can experience that sense of calm and being safe, that can be a motivating factor also to expand that. So that's what if, this one is. But it also has to do with, in the everyday life, we do have plenty of kind of stresses. And often we may not be aware, sometimes some kind of the major triggers may really imbalance us, kind of put us into this really high zone, like the agitated states. Or other times we may be going through situations that will kind of we stay in that so long that eventually we become numb, drop into this low kind of numbing state, depressed or the numbing state. In either of those two states, if we remain stuck, that's not very comforting, helpful. How can we notice and bounce back, disconnect or disengage, not disengage from such? So the nurturing moment is part of the practice also. That's just right in the beginning. It's actually we have found the great kind of resonance with like the trauma-informed practices like tracking and resourcing, grounding. That some Elaine Mira-Carras has this model like for resiliency practice. There's a resiliency zone. If it gets too much, you get, when it's too high and stuck, the high zone and the low zone. Most of the time we're in the resiliency, but when we are not, that's where we are suffering. So our goal is can we notice and disengage from that? That when we do disengage, where do we come? To something comforting. And if we can do that, we would not be stuck in those high or low zones. Like that. So that's the part. And this is, if it's okay, we will just do very, very short, because this morning Ali had beautifully led, with also by having the conversation between the three and then the attuning to those moments when we felt kindness and like that. So you already have that kind moment already. But what I like to do is just briefly for us to do this nurturing moment just briefly for a couple of minutes. So if it's okay, if you could kindly just adjust your posture and find a comfortable position. Since it's in the afternoon after the lunch, it might be a little difficult to stay awake. So perhaps placing our back in a fully upright position, and then just letting it settle might help us stay alert. But also we want to settle our minds, so finding a way to place the body in a comfortably kind of stable and still position, perhaps the feet flat on the floor. And our hands can be just resting on our knees or thighs, or folded and placed in our lap. Please feel free to just place your gaze just vacantly downwards, just leaving slightly open, or if it feels more comfortable to close, please do close your eyes, and your lips and teeth in natural position, just gently touching. Just connect with this posture, with your body, this upright position of the body. The feet on the floor, your hands resting on your knees or so forth. And then bring your attention gently to your own body, either around in the area of the head or the feet, and just attune to the sensations there, whatever they feel, pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Just acknowledge, notice. If something becomes too painful, you may just gently move your attention to another part of the body, up or down, where it feels pleasant or neutral. And in that way, let's attune to our own sensations for a moment. Placing our attention here in the present with our body and the sensations. If we have come across any particular place of the body where we may have felt tension, where it feels tight, heavy, or even a certain feeling of distress, let's take one deep breath, an intentional and slow breathing in all the way down into our belly. As we do this, if it feels comfortable, just feel like inhaling this refreshing and rejuvenating airs that enter and fill your body, melting away those tensions and distressing feelings where you felt. And as you breathe out, just with that outgoing breath, as you breathe out slowly and completely, letting all those distressing feelings and tensions go. Let them clear away as they evaporate with the outgoing breath. And then just settle in that unfolding sense of relaxation of body and mind. Now I would like to invite you to bring that moment of kindness that you were able to notice earlier this morning, and place yourself in that moment, bringing that moment to your mind as vividly as possible. And as we do that, just bring part of the attention to our own body to see if it feels any different. Being or connecting with that moment, does it bring a shift in our feelings, a certain feeling of warmth, tenderness, a sense of being safe and secure? And as we conclude this brief reflective practice, let's take a moment to dedicate any benefit that may arise from our connecting with kindness, this compassion. Let's dedicate this for well-being of others. And please open your eyes when you feel ready, if you're having your eyes closed. So that is a kind of the brief way of connecting with this nurturing, comforting moment. The resiliency part, I just want to go very quickly because my colleague will then present the program itself more extensively, but just the theory part. So the resiliency, if we think the resiliency has to do with how quickly we can bounce back from a certain kind of adversity, certain challenges and difficulties that we face, how if it is measured, how quickly we bounce back from being up or down, or from any kind of moment of those distressing feelings and so forth. How can we do that? Attention. The first module has the cultivating attention, stability, and clarity. Of course, it in itself, it has many, many different layers and dimensions and the benefits, of course. But one of the things, if we think that this is a way of developing the greater ability to notice those sensations and feelings or anything else where we don't want to be, and to be able to disengage from there more quickly and to stay where we want to be. For example, from that feeling high, to disengage and come to that nurturing. Or in the everyday moment, that certain distress, to come to whatever you are doing at desk or talking or like that, and to be able to stay there instead of immediately pulled back into that distressing moment. That part can be done with the mindfulness of breathing, developing greater kind of impulse or cognitive control. And that's in the mindfulness of breathing, when you are bringing the attention to the breath, utilizing this introspective kind of monitoring part, meta-awareness. And when you notice when your mind wanders to something, acknowledging and gently bringing back to the breath and staying there. That's basically developing the ability, if you will, like the muscles, to notice where you don't want to be, easier to disengage, and to stay where you want to stay. That's part. The second module, before I go to the second module, I want to come to this briefly, and for that to make sense. This is one of the theories of change that we see here, and this is from the 2nd century text by Vasubandhu. When one has not cleared away the dispositions for afflictive emotions, certain reactions, and the triggers for these emotions are in proximity. If one engages these triggers with those exaggeration or the false projections, then the causes of the afflictive emotions are complete. So nothing will prevent from having those reactions. So imagine that if I'm predisposed to having craving for alcohol, that disposed, and the alcohol is nearby, and if my engagement to the alcohol, consciously or unconsciously, is that this is something wonderful, this is all what I need to, it would be, there's nothing that will prevent me from reaching out and binging on that. And likewise, any other reactions are like that. So there are dispositions, having dispositions, one thing, the possible triggers in the proximity, and it's really how we evaluate appraisal, do we engage with them properly or incorrectly with this kind of, the distorted ways. Those three parts, if you keep in mind, then that we can say that what we are doing here is, first, we are basically trying to develop, notice those and disengage. When I see the alcohol, I go away. The second part is developing further. Not always you're going to be disengaged. So you are developing a way to notice without bringing, at least kind of holding back that projection. So it's about non-appraisal. It's not so much about the appraising that this how harmful this could be for me. It's just basically noticing with a certain distance without judging as good or bad, so that without a projection, those impulses could subside. And it's really the third part that has to do with, in here we're talking in the context of self-compassion, but any of those impulses as well, but all our own issues, ups and downs when that happened, that's how we blame ourselves and so forth, all those things also. Could we see that also by, bringing a proper kind of perspective to those situations that we are facing? So that's what kind of leads to what Geshe Jimbala yesterday presented, the theory of change, from the perception or the worldview to the attitudes to emotions, and behaviors, and that's how they get reinforced. Basically, the way that you see that this big kind of the part is the view or perspective that kind of include the attitudes and so forth. When we have those, those perspectives lead to healthy or unhealthy emotions and behaviors. But the perspectives are, come in various degrees. We can have just very kind of content knowledge, just awareness that is simply in the head, sort of the book knowledge kind of. Or, that perspective, like our ups and downs, like this common humanity, that I'm not alone, that others also have kind of the failures and the weaknesses and the mistakes and so forth and so on, that self-compassion, the practice presents so beautifully. Here, this can be more personalized, personal insight, and that's where the kind of the cognitive part comes. That it's not simply stepping back, but making sense of it. But if it is only in the head, it may not have much impact. But when it becomes personalized, this aha moment, and then that would have an impact. And then that insight, how we can make it embodied, more sustained, that becomes the lens of our mind. And that's where that repeated, the practices and so forth. And it's through that, then when we encounter those ups and downs, the emotions will be different, except of kind of being harsh, being gentle, and so forth. So that's one way of looking at it. Just briefly, this is because I want to move. And the second part, as you see, the compassion part, compassion for others. Of course, the compassion for oneself, if we understand our own ups and downs in this larger context, then it's easier to see other situations also from the larger context. But in the compassion for others, what is if there's a silver bullet, what is that? It's the affection, this is a certain tenderness towards others, like the mother feels for her child, and like that. So the compassion, like if you think of this, affectionate concern arising from witnessing the suffering of others, which wishes to see that suffering alleviated. So there is a certain, as Geshe yesterday mentioned, there is a cognitive component, there's an affective component, there's a motivational or this component, noticing someone's suffering. But such a person is someone that you have the deep sense of kind of the concern or the affection, the deeper sense of affection. If that's there, then the emotional kind of reaction, that is a response to see such a person relieved of such, and in some cases want to alleviate that. So here again, the theory is that the fourth module we focus on impartiality or the inclusiveness, and that's very much like what Ali did earlier this morning, bringing three people, neutrals, someone close, and someone who may be difficult, but really seeing how we are, we belong to the same boat, in the sense with our aspirations, the deep aspirations to be happy, to be free from suffering, and so forth. But also we are that they also have limitations like we do. They also, their own reactions and so forth are grounded in those dispositions and that are shaped by the various forces, including environment and so forth. So when we can see that, we can put others ups and down into into certain perspective, and that sense of belonging is what it's maybe seen as identification, the identifying with someone. As Frans de Waal, one of our colleagues who has done a lot of studies with primates at Emory, he says that identification is the key portal to empathy. So it's about how we can connect with others like they are one of us, like they're just like me. That's the same type. Another part, how that sense of affection or the closeness that comes with that sense of belonging, to further deepen, we're not only kind of sharing these deep aspirations and so forth, and our weakness, kind of the human, shared human vulnerabilities and weaknesses and so forth, but also we are actually, as when it comes to me, I am supported by a vast number of people, that my family, the friends, and and this is where that maybe for whole humanity might be difficult to see that, but at least to people that we can live with, interact from day to day, our workplace and so forth, if we can see how what they do benefit us, that put that in context, that sense of kind of what we receive from them will result in gratitude. And gratitude is characterized by a sense of warmth towards the other. And again, drawing from the same kind of the studies or the research of Franz de Waal, he says that observing over 7,000 food sharing among the apes, bonobos, he says that one thing that predicts kind of who they will share the food when they receive is having groomed earlier. You can say that receiving some help, or it's in our biology that nature has designed, selected for us to feel, warm towards. And that is what the deeper affection. And then the sixth module is really about, if the compassion has to do with noticing someone's distress, and instead of that becoming my own distress, empathic distress, to become empathic concern, to kind of bring the focus to other. That affection combined with awareness of others' vulnerabilities and difficulties. If we think about here, it's even not just someone just having some pain or like that, but it can be like the social problems, inequity, and the global problems, and a whole host of other. If we are aware of those, then there is the empathy combined with affection can lead to the wish to alleviate, or to want to see the problems alleviated. So that's what really the model is about. And that very first study I mentioned with the college students, when we designed, this had measured IL-6, which is inflammation, and the cortisol, before 6 weeks of training and afterwards. What it shows is that in the group that actually practiced, put about 15 minutes per day for in a week, it shows that the interleukin, while before the intervention was no different, afterwards it was lower, and cortisol, while they are put into this challenging task where he's standing, in this non-responsive front of judges, it does go up. Public speaking does cause the distress, yes. But that you can see that it comes down quickly, more quickly, measure of resiliency. So with that, I leave my part here and invite my colleague to present the rest. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I got to get used to the lights up here. So again, my name is Tim Harrison. I'm Associate Director for CBCT at the Center at Emory. The Compassion Center sometimes is our shorthand for the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics. And I'm just going to talk about a few of the programs and also our teacher certification. You have a sense of how CBCT has been used. First, just a few notes about the early research, which really, I think, is responsible for bringing interest to the program at Emory and building all of these connections that have grown over the years. That one is the study that Geshe Lobsang just talked about. This one is one that Geshe Jempa mentioned last night about compassion meditation increasing our empathic accuracy. So this is a test where you're shown pictures of people's eyes making various expressions, and you have to pick one of 4 emotions that you think they're expressing. And it seems that doing compassion training, CBCT in this case, might increase your ability to identify emotions. And I think what really got them excited, the scientists working on this, is they did this in an fMRI and noticed that the parts of the brain associated with empathic reasoning were also more active in the compassion training meditators. So there seemed to be some actual physical evidence of a shift going on. Another really interesting early study, again, these are in the 2008 to 2012 range. Gail Desbourd, I should mention Jenny Mascaro. Her name will come up again. She was the PI on that previous study. Gail Desbourd put people in a scanner and showed them images of people having pleasurable experiences, neutral experiences, and painful or difficult experiences, and watched what happened in the brain. In particular, the amygdala, which you may know or you may have heard, it's the center for fear, but really they're saying now it's just saliency. It seems to go off fire when we're deciding something's important to us. Well, in this case, what's fascinating, I think, is that they actually the control was a mindful attention training group. So you might call it mindfulness only. And they compared that to the compassion meditation. And in this case, there was a decrease, if I'm getting this part correctly. Someone can correct me. I'm not the scientist, so forgive me. But my understanding is with the positive and neutral images, at least in those cases, there was a similar effect from either doing just mindfulness or mindfulness with compassion orientation. But with the images of pain or suffering, and I've seen these images, if you've seen them, some of them are quite disturbing. People experiencing injuries in war, children who are hungry. In that case, even the amygdala response did go down. There's a kind of softening of response for the mindfulness group, but in the compassion group, the response showed more activity. So it seemed like there might be a heightened saliency or response to the suffering. What does that mean? Well, it's at this point up to people to make conjecture about that. But for those of us who do these practices, there is a sense that there's a greater sensitivity to people who are suffering. And as I think it was Chris mentioned yesterday, or Geshe Jinpa, less aversion, perhaps, to that suffering. So we're not shutting off or turning away from it. Alongside this, measures, subjective measures of depression or hopelessness did not go up. So just because you're attuning to suffering more doesn't mean you're feeling more depressed or hopeless. So we hope. So this led to a number of programs, and again, I'm not going to talk about the research outcomes anymore today. That we'll be covering tomorrow, some of these studies, I think. But we had the opportunity to work with foster care children in the Atlanta system. Very promising outcomes in those studies, very heartwarming for those who got to work with them. We've also been asked, and this is not so well known or publicized, these are journals that are kind of particular to, in this case, suicide and life-threatening behavior. But for 5 years now, one of the CBCT teachers has been taking a kind of adapted version of compassion training into Grady Hospital, which is the big urban hospital in downtown Atlanta, and meeting weekly with a suicide survivor group, over half of whom are homeless on a typical night. So it's a very special group, a very needy group, and it's got legs. So it's continuing, and they're discovering things, as you see here, about shame and depressive symptoms with that group. One of our largest areas of impact, it seems, in the last 4 or 5 years started really with a collaboration with the Emory School of Medicine. And we talked earlier, Jimpa put it to us to think, are we just doing these practices for people, for individuals, helping each individual become more resilient, more compassionate? What about the system? And in this case, we have an example of really, to be honest, kind of getting lucky. And some of you may know situations like this, where a top administrator in an institution takes an interest and says, oh, this could be valuable. And so in this case, Dr. Larson was a kidney transplant surgeon, still is, 300 research papers published with his name on it. And somehow he found his way, actually I know how, the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a distinguished visiting presidential faculty member at Emory. So he comes every now and then, gives talks, meets with students. And Dr. Larson came to one of these talks, and from that said, I want to take this CBCT, see what this is all about. And he said, oh, this could be helpful for physicians. We're dealing with suffering all the time, and this gives a way to make sense of that, to work with that. And as a wise leader would do, he didn't just say, okay, now everyone go do this. He said, I want to invite you to teach a class to my leadership team. So 18 of the associate deans, executive deans of this and that, all came and took the course, and many were very moved by it, found it very practical, and at least none of them thought it was too weird. So they said, okay, let's try this. Let's bring it in and have the center come offer this to the med students. So this is our 5th year now, teaching 4 courses a year to med students. It's an elective for Emory med students, and 2 courses a year to staff and faculty in the med school. So, and I'll show Jennifer Mascaro, who's a professor at the med school, has done research, published research on the med students. I'll mention in a moment. A wonderful collaboration has also emerged, starting about 3 years ago with the University of Illinois, College of Medicine in Peoria. It's the 2nd biggest medical school complex in the state of Illinois. And the Dean of Research there heard about CBCT, thought this could be helpful, came, took the course, and wound up getting funding to bring 5 faculty members from the med school and 1 from an adjacent nursing school to become certified teachers at Emory and take this back to the Peoria Medical School. So it's been a lovely collaboration. I actually would love Bento Soares to stand up, if you would. If anyone wants to talk, here is Dean of Research, who we've enjoyed working with for 3 years now. And if anyone wants to ask him, oh gosh. He actually deserves applause. But he has a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom about how to make way for this sort of thing in an institutional setting. I mean, just the skill he has brought in his position to slowly do this, then this, and not go out saying, everyone has to, they have to do this, but to make it available and to make friends and really, it's been a wonderful case study of this. There's also, it's being taught in Albert Einstein Hospital, med students in Brazil, and another medical school in Brazil that I don't know how to pronounce. We have a teacher in Brazil, so several teachers in Brazil, actually. We're now doing continuing nursing education, and at Emory, you can get C&E credits, and we've been invited to the Cleveland Clinic and notably the Cambridge Health Alliance Center for Mindfulness and Compassion, which Dr. Germer is founding member of the board there and was kind enough to invite us to offer this compassion training course there. That's been a wonderful experience and feels like the beginning of a collaboration up there. So again, there have been some studies in those healthcare environments. I won't go into it other than to say the one with second-year med students is qualitative. Checking the time. Okay. Qualitative surveys, but they did show increased compassion, decreased depression, better sleep quality, and significantly, I think, decreased sense of loneliness, which is certainly something that plagues many young people today, but in particular med students are so focused as they get especially as they get into their medical school education. 2 studies on breast cancer survivors. The first one was in Arizona, where we have several CBCT teachers certified, and Sally Dodds did this one with Tad Pace, and another one in Spain, more recently published this past year, Edgar Gonzalez Hernandez, who has translated with others the materials into Spanish, and very positive outcomes, heartwarming stories. It's been an honor to, I'm so lucky I get to be hearing about, the benefits people seem to have. And to put a point on this, breast cancer survivorship is usually it's a cure. You're told you're free from disease, you've been cured. And yet the lingering effects of having had this life-threatening experience are clearly very difficult to deal with, especially for some. So the oncology centers are turning their attention to this part of cancer care, cure and care. I like that pairing that came up yesterday. And it seems to be very helpful, in particularly the this study, there's a lot of creative work going on. I just want to highlight a couple of them. One, we talked about interleukin-6 levels going down from CBCT practice. Well, interleukin-6 is an inflammatory marker that indicates if you have HIV positive, it actually indicates if it goes up that you may be moving toward full-blown AIDS. It's something you have tracked if you're HIV positive. So Vince Marconi and Dr. Mahani at Grady Clinic for AIDS brought us to do a small study, a pilot study, and it was taken well with men who have AIDS there. And they're doing the blood work to see if it decreased their interleukin-6. This is in process, as well as one, and there's a couple of these that are interesting. And I found out self-compassion has some of these as well, where it's taught to partners. In this case, in Heidelberg, Germany, compassion training offered to a depressed partner, clinically depressed person, and their supportive partner together in these small groups. Very promising outcomes, but it's a 5-year process, and so we'll see what happens in the end. And before I go, there also an interesting study in Arizona offering CBCT to transgender teens and their parents. And the model is really wonderful, I think. As a parent of a teenager, I get this. The parent and teen come to the place to take CBCT, and the teens go in one room with the other teens and a teen-friendly CBCT teacher, and the parents go in the other room with the adult-friendly teacher. They do you imagine doing their nurturing moment, or their attuning to just like me type practices, and then they get back in the car and they go home together. Again, promising outcomes in this pilot study, and all of these have people then applying to do the next level of research. Last one I'll talk about in healthcare, and last but not least, a very vibrant and immediate developing relationship we have with compassion, with spiritual health at Emory Healthcare, which Emory now has 12 hospitals that it operates under Woodruff Health Sciences. And it's part of the university. The university and Woodruff Health Sciences are under the same umbrella. So it's this huge system. It's very academic, research oriented. And they happen to be one of the situations where all of those hospitals also consolidate their chaplaincy programs under the umbrella of this one entity. So Director of Education, Maureen Shelton, and they train chaplains. In fact, by some measures, train more chaplains at Emory than at any other center in the country. So there's a lot of chaplain training going on, and a lot of thinking about what does it mean to train a chaplain, train someone who's providing spiritual counseling to people who more and more are not of your own faith tradition. This is the kind of conundrum, one of them, that they're facing. So as they searched, the leaders, George Grant and Maureen Shelton, took CBCT and felt like, oh, this really could be helpful. And again, wisely brought it to the leadership team at Spiritual Health. And then now, for the last, this is our third year, we've been offering CBCT to all of the new resident chaplains who come into the chaplain training program. And this is, actually, I'll go ahead and ask George to stand up. Please stand up. So if you want to talk to George Grant on Maureen Shelton, who are, George is the director at Spiritual Health, and Maureen, the director of education for chaplains. They have between them a number of decades, I won't say how many, of doing chaplaincy work and training chaplains. And their vision includes research. So they have a huge research. Everything's being measured. Patient outcomes are being measured. Effects on the chaplains are being measured. There's a waitlist control each year for the new chaplain residents. And then spontaneously in this process, the chaplains started reporting that they're using the insights of compassion, and it's the conditions that lead to compassion, which is not, which we've all been talking about today, using these in their patient interactions in ways that seemed helpful. So this idea, these brilliant people we're working with, we could develop. Could we develop an intervention, a bedside intervention, that's based on these skills that you're teaching? So that's the current experiment. There's a manual, and the chaplains, this group, in fact, about, 12 of those lovely people are being now taught to do these interventions, and the patient outcomes are being measured. And Dr. Charles Raison, who's back consulting on this project, and Jenny Mascaro is the PI, and we have a grant from one of the Peace Award grants from Mind and Life is supporting this research. So thank you, Mind and Life. Very helpful. The final note, there's a group in San Diego, UC San Diego, that has adapted over the last 3 years CBCT as a therapeutic intervention. So far, nothing I've described is itself a clinical intervention. This took a year of working through 3 cohorts and manualizing, collaborating between Lobsang, myself, and actually a number of people, but also Dr. Ariel Lang at UC San Diego, and Pollyanna Kazmar, who's a clinical psychologist who'd been doing exposure therapy and other PTSD therapies for 10 years or more before she took CBCT, became a certified instructor, and then helped do this adaptation. So the outcomes after those 3 cohorts, they then did a trial on 3 cohorts, a pilot study, the outcome comparing the CBCT for veterans to an active control of relaxation for veterans, a relaxation, kind of breathing relaxation control. And the outcomes are very strong to show decrease of PTSD studies. And this is not a qualitative survey, it's through a very lengthy interview process to determine, are the PTSD symptoms decreasing? So they're now applying for multi-site to see how much further this might go. The therapists involved are so hopeful that there might be a way to treat PTSD that doesn't involve the often painful explicit reliving or recounting of traumatic experience. So not that, that actually clearly works in many cases, but not all. So it's not that this would replace that, but maybe provide an alternative. Another study at Emory. I'm going to leave time for some questions here. So this is, I think this is the last. thing before I talk about teacher certification, but I do want to tell you about this. It's been very rewarding to work with the Atlanta Public School System, with their teachers. These statistics are quite alarming. If you haven't heard this, sit down before I tell you. Oh, you are sitting down. Teachers come out of school ready to teach K through 12. Actually, all of our research is with K through 8. So imagine a 22-year-old, 24-year-old out of the master's program with the energy to say, I want to teach children. This is my career. I've invested, these precious years of my life to be educated to do this. Then they say, I'm going to teach in the urban schools where, things are, there's more poverty, there's more violence. Let me help. They do this within 3 years. Half of those teachers have quit teaching forever. Like, that's it. They've had enough. So just imagine the loss, the personal loss for the teacher, of course, but for the schools, the percentage of students now being taught by novice teachers has skyrocketed. It's flipped. It's like it used to be 10% 50 years ago. Now only 10% of our students in public schools are having veteran teachers teach them, meaning people who've taught for 15 years or more. So this program, Collaboration and Reflection to Enhance Atlanta Teacher Effectiveness, CREATE, was federally funded from the Department of Education about 4 years ago to provide an intensive support program for these new teachers, starting in their last year of school and then 2 years into their teaching. And one of the components of this is CBCT. There's also a mentoring component and then a professional education component that's built around discussion groups. So CBCT is just part of it. It's like most education research. It's messier than what most of our clinical science colleagues are interested in. But after 3 years, and again, they need to collect this data for at least 5 years before it's actually meaningful, because it's a 3-year program. But even after 3 years, 96% of these, this is about 36 teachers, have remained in teaching. So they're sticking with it, and they're reporting value from doing CBCT, and the word's getting out. So what was 5 schools to start is now 16 schools in Southeast Atlanta, all leading to this one high school, Jackson Cluster. It's been so, again, sound like a broken record, but heartwarming to get to teach myself in these schools in some cases, but see others who are certified to go into the schools and learn to teach to these teachers. Atlanta Public Schools, Woodward Academy, Pridea School in Atlanta have also been teaching their teachers CBCT. Dr. Soares from Peoria wisely invited some community leaders in support in Peoria to come to one of my CBCT classes if you're interested. And before you know it, the superintendent of schools for all of Peoria, 300,000 people live there, says, this compassion training, we need this for our teachers. So now Bento and his colleagues are offering it to teachers in Peoria. And we were invited also to a high school in Mexico City recently to teach. So now I get to invite 2 more people to stand, Jennifer Knox and Emma Brooks, who've both been teaching in the public schools. And it's wonderful work, and hopefully we'll continue to get better. Do we have time, do you think? We have till 4. Maybe we don't have time. What do you think, Geshe? Keep going. So finally we'll say CBCT, teacher certification briefly, started in 2011, really out of this need for research to have both people who can teach CBCT and also to do it in a faithful way with fidelity. We now have 20 to 25 folks enrolled annually. It takes 4 to 6 months to get through the full thing. Many takes a bit longer, but it starts with a 7-day retreat, intensive kind of self. Well, first you have to take the course, and then once you've taken it, you apply, and then 7-day retreat to really experience the practices for yourself deeply for 4 days, and then begin the process of studying the model, unpacking the parts and pieces, their relationships. We have an 8-week practicum. There's an online way to do that, but it's an interactive course. There's a live component, and there's a lot of reading and writing class plans and getting feedback on your presentation of the material or representation of the material. Also becoming familiar with the science. We conclude with an in-person 3-day workshop. It's your chance to practice teaching and get feedback on that. And then a supervised co-teaching in the end. Typically, people are placed with an experienced teacher as well as having coaching from our staff as they go through that first time teaching CBCT. So that's the model. We have teachers around. We have the materials now in German, Spanish, and Portuguese. Oh, why is Brazil not there? And Brazil. And in many states. So that's it. Thank you. And we have about 10 minutes. And we would love to hear your feedback, questions, reflections, discussion. So microphone, if you have something. While we're waiting for that. Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah.
It's not a question for you, if that's okay to ask a question to Dr. Lobsang?
Sure.
Yeah. I was puzzled by the fact that you're bringing science to Tibetans. And I wanted to know a little bit more about that, among other things, because I am inclined to believe that science is just discovering what they already know.
Thank you so much for asking the question and the confidence in the monks of having all the knowledge. Actually, Emory Tibetan Science Initiative, which really it started in 2006 at the invitation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to create this comprehensive and sustainable science program. It's in 4 areas: philosophy of science, neuroscience, physics, and biology. And these are now implemented as part of core curriculum in major monastic universities, Tibetan monastic universities, and both monasteries and nunneries. I believe the intention behind really is very noble and far-reaching. His Holiness's vision is far-reaching because knowledge, it's true that the Buddhist communities have focused on inner life, understanding mind and emotions, and of course with the extensive philosophy and logic and epistemology and so forth. But it concerned more about understanding our inner life and how to improve quality of life or happiness, well-being, liberation, all those things through inner transformation primarily. Whereas the Western science, modern science, at least not until long ago, focused on external kind of investigation. And I think there's a great value in bringing this together so that our understanding of human condition is richer. And His Holiness, I believe, sees that how these 2 major traditions of learning can complement each other. There will be a more kind of a complete form of knowledge that will help the humanity. And we are in some ways seeing that happening, actually. Our monks and nuns are engaging with the scientists in conversations, it's just very kind of pilot. It's a small scale, but some research as well. And I think this will help enhance our understanding of at least the human condition, and in that way to help promote our human well-being. But thank you for asking that question. This is a big study, a big program. For example, this year we took 99 professors from mainly from North America, just one from Europe and one from Israel and one from Canada, but otherwise all were from the United States for this 6-week summer intensive at 3 locations in South India at Tepungsera and Ganden monasteries. And over 1,300 monastics participated in this 5-year, the 5 classes that we have so far been able to teach. Next year will be the 6th year. It's a 6-year program. So next year we're expecting to have over 1,600 monastics participating in the course. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just kindly reminded, not to take any more questions. I was kindly just reminded that we should be breaking now. So,
I am Susan Gitau. Hope I'm loud enough. From Kenya, and I'm here courtesy of Compassionate Minds and Hearts, Chris Gama, Michelle, Christine. I really appreciate, and other hands that are invisible. You cannot imagine how I'm feeling when you are presenting everything there. I don't see Africa there. I don't see what could have been the big challenge for you to come to Africa. I know we have our challenges in Africa. They are many. But there are people there and institutions, learning institutions, health institutions, spiritual institutions that can work together. And it's my desire that tomorrow, by the end of or the closure of this conference, we will have one big body connecting all of us, because I don't want to come to the USA, benefit the way I have benefited, and when I go back to Africa, I die. So those of you that are here that would want to spread this message with me in Africa, I am willing and my hands are open. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
thank you.
So we need to conclude.
Yeah, Peter asked us to conclude, so maybe you could tell people. So,
Yeah, Angela, you have a comment? Yeah, please. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just curious, thank you for presenting. It's just, Emory CBCT seem to have really had a wonderful success. The question I have is, Tim, you presented the application of CBCT in many different domains. So like the foster care and other setting, medical school, nurse training, and so on. So the question I have is, when you bring CBCT into these kind of different specific constituencies, do you adapt or do you really maintain the same program structure? As how much of adaptation that goes into this? That's one specific question I have. And the second question is, when you bring into a new environment like a medical school, to have that top-down approach, is it really dependent all the time on finding someone who's going to be championing this from a leadership position? Or is there how much role the science plays in making a case? So and then the third question is, what have you learned what have you learned from experience of going into these many different sectors?
Wow.
And to what extent those experiences have shaped your refinement and rethinking, in kind of some kind of reflexivity in the process? So those are many questions.
Those
you could
are
choose
great.
to answer only one.
No,
so.
those are great questions, but I have to say, 5 minutes ago, Peter came to me and said, please end now. 5 minutes ago. So because you deserve a break. That's what he said. But Peter, what shall we do?
Shorter break.
So we do have one more session this afternoon, and we want to make sure we give her her full time.
Yes.
So I want to honor that commitment that we have to Rhoda. So we could answer this question, take a shorter break, and then come back. Y'all promise to come back in the next session?
Let me take. Sure. Thank you for all those three questions. Really, the first one, to what extent does the teachers have the liberty to adapt to different populations? Actually, the CBCT so far is we have these modules and the certain kind of principles that are laid, but the teachers have great liberty at catering to the specific age group, specific population, and that's how, even to an extent, then we have over the years changed. Actually, how it is delivered has evolved over the times as we learn more, as teachers bring this new perspective and challenges, like adding the nurturing moment part, but not only that, and then having more activities and hands-on part, those are happening. Medical school part, top-down, I think it's both top-down and bottom-up, as you mentioned yesterday. The medical school was wonderful because the dean, he is a meditator, and when he brought like the 40-some leaders from the medical school to have CBCT, it was really inspired by, what motivated him was seeing this depersonalization that's going in the medical community. And that's what affects the whole environment, but eventually the patients. So he wanted to see if the culture of compassion can be created. And over the time, it would not happen overnight, but that's what in the last several years it has been happening. And people who participate, like whether it's faculty and the staff or the students, it's their kind of feedback is what's kind of keeping it going. What was the third one? Yeah, I forgot about the third one. But yeah, since we have taken so much time, thank you so much thank you for your patience. Thank you.